Want to get your models painted quicker? Stay tuned for how I do it and how I think you can do it too. Here we are, another video for the brand new Warhammer Underworlds box set, Embergard. It's taken all of my patience and self-restraint to hold off on painting these until I can do it on camera. I love the sculpts of these little rat men, and after slogging my way through the Emberwatch, I'm here for some quality models. With the Emberwatch video, I showed you how you can paint models with a simple technique using high color contrast to great tabletop results. This time, however, we're going full SlapChop raggy paint style.
Watch this one slap.
Sure, a lot of SlapChop videos are out there, but this is how I do it, and I think it's a way you should try and doing it too. The first steps are the same as they were for the Emberwatch. You're going to want to prime your models and then either dry brush, or if you have one, airbrush your zenithal over the top. If you haven't seen it already, you can see how I did this for the Emberwatch here. Now, with our model zenithal, we're going to work inside to out. So that means first up, we want to get the skin painted up. Now, there isn't a lot of this showing. We've got mostly fur and cloth on these models, but there is little bits here and there. So we're going to use Contrast Vulpes Pink. In fact, we're going to be using Games Workshop contrast paints for the whole of this paint job. Whenever you're using contrast paints, it is super important that you are careful in where you're applying that contrast paint. I usually take quite a lot of the contrast paint onto my brush, load up my brush well, and then apply it somewhere central to the area that I want to spread that contrast paint on, and work outwards, being careful not to paint any areas that I don't want that color. The hardest thing about painting really good models using contrast paints is not constantly having to go back and touch up where you've overpainted on areas. As with all the contrast paints, nothing complicated. We're just taking a good amount of the paint so that there's enough liquid volume on the surface for it to flow and re-level itself so that there's less on the raised areas, more in the pooled areas. Remove any screaming excess so it doesn't pool too much, and just control the flow. The metal that all of these Skaven are carrying and wearing are a kind of brassy bronze color, and I really want to keep that color matching the box art. As with all of these paint jobs, I'm looking to match the box art as close as possible so you get models that look like they look on the cards that you're using. To do this, I wanted a speed paint SlapChop effect, but with metallics. I'm not a big fan of the Army Painter speed paint metallics, so I have my own system. For this, I started with speed metal from Scale Color. This is that same white silver that I used on my Emberwatch. I'm going to paint a coat of that over all metallic areas on all of the models. This is a great color for just giving a bright metallic look to things. I don't paint it always in the darkest recesses, but mostly cover the models. On top of this, I'm going to use a 50-50 mix of Gore-Grunter Fur Contrast and Gryph-Hound Orange. I'm going to thin that a little bit as well, and just get that nice consistency to get a really good bronze metallic look to the model. The silver from underneath continues to show that reflectivity through, so it really works as a metallic paint, and it's super easy to do. All the benefits of contrast paints with the added benefits of that true metallic look. You guys are the reason I do these videos. If you enjoy them, please subscribe, ding that notification bell, and like the video. And, throw a comment down there. Tell me how you are planning to paint your Tunnelpack. What colors are you going to use? I would love to know, but with that, let's get back to how I'm painting them. The fur is going to be painted exactly the same way as the skin. A thin layer carefully applied across all of the fur to get a nice build-up of paint in the recesses while still tinting the higher raised surfaces. In this case, we are using Rattling Grime, which is a nice desaturated dark brown. Works great for a kind of black/dark brown fur color. Now, for the cloth, we don't want anything too bright. Most of the contrast paints have really high color saturation. We want to be careful with that. We want to keep it toned down a little bit. I'm using Achelian Green as a kind of blue-green color, but I am going to thin it reasonably heavily, probably 1:1, in order to get a little bit of translucency there to fade the impact of that blue. For Ritak, we want an even more faded blue than we used on Nich and Kretatok. And in order to do that, whilst not having to use a million different paints, I'm going to take the same Achelian Green that we used for those two models, but thin it even further so that we get a really, really desaturated grey-blue color. If you have more contrast paints, you could use a different blue for it, but I think this one still matches the artwork pretty well. For Zikkit himself, I am going to use Sigvald Burgundy, and this one I do want to be a little bit richer. Looking at the art cards, his robes have a little bit more glamour to them. They're a little bit more saturated in color, so we don't need to thin this one down. And if we were to thin it down, it would start coming close to the color of the skin, and we want to keep those somewhat distinct. Now, onto those lightning weapons. These are Warpstone. It is the thing that Skaven crave. It fuels all of their contraptions, and we want it to be loud. So for this, I am going to use two different greens. It's prominent enough that I think it is really worth mixing your greens here. If you only have one paint, use Striking Scorpion Green. It's super vibrant and it works really well. I used a little bit of Dark Angel's Green as well in the more recessed areas, especially on the bigger weapons, to push that contrast further, to go from brighter to darker. So up to you. I like the look of having both, but honestly, even after that first stage, it looks great, and I'm only applying that Dark Angel's Green to a couple of areas. So if you don't want the extra expense of another contrast paint, feel free to stop at just Striking Scorpion Green. Alright, onto those bits and bobs. Leathers were painted with Black Legion. The wooden areas were all painted just with that straight Gorgrunter fur, sometimes thinned a little bit more than other times just to give some variance. Leather was also painted Gorgrunter fur. I really wanted to reduce the amount of paints that you needed for this model, and these are all such small areas of the model that having them the same color isn't the biggest issue. I did also use some skeleton horde for things like teeth, claws, little bits of rope on some of the models. For the base, again, being mindful of how many different paints I'm bringing into this, I again use Rattling Grime. It's a desaturated brown, it's not going to be too showy, it's not on huge areas of the Skaven fur because there's so much cloth covering it. So that was my choice. If you want something that's going to stand out a little bit more, you could maybe use a Snakebite Leather contrast paint as something a little bit brighter, or you could use a grey to desaturate it further. It's up to you. With the bases fully painted, the last step to do is to do that lap of victory. I used a Mars Black heavy body acrylic paint, the same thing that I used for my Emberwatch, to give a nice consistent feel, and just paint the rim of that base. 2 thin coats, just as the good old Duncan says. Okay, so we have done the basics. If you want to get your models up on the table and play some games, I think these already look great. But if you want to take it a step further, we can easily do that. Firstly, both Niche and TikTok have some flames on the bombs that they're carrying. So we can do a quick paint job here using the Gryph-hound Orange that we already used for the metallics and the Black Legion that we used for the leathers. If you are feeling a little extra, you can also use one of the yellows from the contrast range for the brightest part of the flame. It's not necessary, I did, but you don't have to. That gets us some nice glowy flame effects. What we're going to do here is just paint first, starting bright and going dark, starting at the wick end of the flame, working our way out to the end. First up, yellow, then the orange, and then finally the black at the end. It doesn't need to take very long. It doesn't need to be wet blended. With flames, the key thing to remember is that the light source is inside of them. This means that instead of the outer edges catching all the light, the innermost recesses catch most of the light. Remember this, and flame effects are really easy. If we're really going to push these models a little bit further, we just need one extra paint, and that is titanium white acrylic paint, or a white paint. And this is my cheat way of making SlapChop look a little bit better. Sure, we've got that nice zenithal to begin with, and we've got the contrast layers over the top, and it looks good. Now we just want to give it a little bit more pop, but we don't want to have a whole range of paints. So what we're going to do is take the white paint and mix it into those base colors that we used to begin with. In the case of the cloth, it's going to be that thin Decalion green. In the case of the fur, it's going to be Rattling Grime. And we mix in some white, we brighten it up a little bit, and then we just paint that on top. Doesn't have to be a lot. If you feel ambitious, you can start introducing some textures. You can do little lines or dots for the cloth to give it that feel of real textured fabric. That is all it takes to really lift these models a little bit further. For the metals, we can go back to our speed metal that we started with and just edge highlight the brightest points on that metal to again make those pop a little bit more. Zikkit's Tunnelpack. The Skaven are a subterranean race, forever gnawing at the underbelly of the realms for their own nefarious purposes. For some, however, this undermining becomes an obsession, compelling them to plan ever more crazed delvings without heed for safety or limitation. Zikkit Rocknor is one such zealot. As a warlock engineer of the clan Skyra, he has the know-how required to construct hazardous but effective digging machines powered by shards of pure warpstone, and the authority to use them however he sees fit. The portable warp grinder he carries not only tunnels through stone, but it carves through the very skin of reality to produce small and unstable gnaw holes through which Zikkit can launch a deadly ambush, or flee when he deems it appropriate. Zikkit first came to Embergard seeking realmstone with which to augment his maniacal digging apparatus. As he roamed the mines, however, a loftier scheme occurred to his devious sensibilities: to collapse swathes of the mining tunnels, burying his enemies beneath tons of igneous rock, and ensuring only an excavator of his singular skill, as he sees it, could extract the now buried realmstone. That this would see Embergard itself collapse into further ruin, becoming prime ground for a city-sized weapons testing facility for this clan Skyra, was just another merit of his plan. He is joined in his ambition by Ritak Verm, an apprentice of Zikkit, who constructed a miniature doom wheel with warp grinder attached, and has seemingly never left it. Hurtling through the tunnels, he revs his contraption's engines with reckless abandon. Should he ever tax the device too far, as Zikkit's tampering has ensured he inevitably will, any unfortunate bystanders are likely to be taken with him in the resulting catastrophe. Zikkit is accompanied by a pair of lowly acolytes he has cajoled into sharing his mad vision. Kritatok, specialized sniffer mask, can detect concentrations of magical material, both buried in rock or on an opponent's personage. The tapping of his slender iron claws against rock is not only to detect weakness in the stone, but to stretch an enemy's nerves to breaking point before he strikes. Niche Singesnout, meanwhile, feverishly desires to join the highly destructive innovators of the Warlock Bombardiers. Nothing brings him more manic glee than blasting through sheer faces of rock with his warp bombs, either by hurling them himself or affixing them to a single-minded blast vermin. Thanks for joining me again for another painting tutorial. I'll have some more coming over the next few weeks, so if you want to be the first to know about them, please do subscribe and ding the notification bell. Likes and comments are also appreciated, and if you are a Blue Sky user, why don't you tag me on all of your Warhammer Underworlds warbands at ragados.social.bsky is my handle on Blue Sky. I would love to see what you guys are doing. I am a huge fan of Underworlds, unsurprisingly, but I'm also a huge fan of seeing other people's art in progress, in completion, and just celebrating this amazing hobby that we have. For now, that's all I have. I will speak to you soon, but for now, later days.